She smiled and
So you're
whispered,
really going
"Close
through
the
with it then?"
door, honey, we
You know
don't
I
want
always
anyone
do.
peeking." That's when I realized, this was no ordinary neighbor. The sound of distant laughter echoed down the hallway as I made my way to my apartment, my thoughts consumed by the day's work. It was just another normal evening, until I passed by her door. Her name was Emily, my neighbor for as long as I could remember. In my mind, she was always the mother of my childhood friend, warm, nurturing, always with a kind word. But today, something was different. As I walked by, I caught a glimpse of her standing in the doorway, her figure framed by the soft glow of the hallway light. Her presence, calm and composed, hit me in a way I hadn't expected. She was dressed simply, yet there was an undeniable elegance in her every move. Her dark hair, slightly tousled, cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves. There was a grace to her posture, like someone who knew exactly how to command a room without ever needing to raise their voice. I had always admired her from afar, but now, as I looked at her, I saw something more, something I couldn't quite place. As if sensing my hesitation, Emily's eyes met mine, and her lips curled into a gentle, knowing smile. "Hey there," she said, her voice warm and familiar, yet with a hint of something that felt more inviting than usual. She stepped back slightly, as if offering space for me to pass by, but I froze for a moment longer than I should have. There was a quiet energy between us, subtle, but undeniable. I cleared my throat, forcing myself to break the silence. "Hey, Emily. How's everything?" "Oh, you know," she replied, her voice soft but steady, "just the usual. But, could you close the door for me? Don't want anyone peeking." She said it casually, as if it were just a regular request. But for some reason, her words sent a flutter through my chest. "Of course," I said, nodding, though my voice sounded a little thicker than usual. I moved towards the door to help her, but before I could, she stepped in front of me and placed her hand on the knob. The brief contact was soft, almost like an accident, but it lingered, sending an inexplicable warmth through me. Her gaze held mine just a moment longer than I expected. Her eyes were kind, but there was something else in them, a quiet confidence, a knowing look that made my heart race. She pulled the door closed, and with that simple gesture, something shifted. I wasn't sure what, but I knew this encounter was different. It wasn't just a neighborly hello anymore. There was a charge in the air that I couldn't ignore. The next few days felt strange, like there was an invisible thread between Emily and me that was too delicate to touch, but impossible to ignore. Each time we passed each other in the hallway, I felt the familiar pull of her presence, but this time, it was more charged, more intense. It wasn't the usual neighborly exchange anymore. The casual greetings now held something heavier, something I couldn't define. One evening, I found myself coming back from a late shift. The building was quiet, and as I turned the corner towards my apartment, I saw Emily again, standing outside her door. She was in the middle of a phone call, but as soon as she noticed me, she quickly wrapped up the conversation. "Hey, you," she said with a smile, her eyes lighting up when she saw me, almost like I had interrupted something, but she didn't mind. "How's your day been?" Her voice was warm, and the usual calmness she exuded was still there, but there was an undercurrent now, something more, something unspoken. "Good," I answered, trying to match her tone, but I could hear the slight unease in my voice. "Just long, you know. How about you?" "Same here," she said, glancing over her shoulder briefly as if to check the time. Her hand rested against the doorframe as she spoke, her fingers lightly brushing the wood. It was a small, subtle gesture, but it caught my attention. There was something about the way she moved, as if she was both at ease and, at the same time, subtly aware of how close we were standing. The air between us felt thick, as if something was about to happen, or at least, that's how it felt to me. I couldn't quite figure it out. It was just a conversation, just another casual exchange. And yet, my thoughts were racing, and I couldn't focus on the words she was saying. My mind kept returning to her, to the way her body language shifted, the way she leaned just a little closer without even realizing it. There was a moment of awkward silence. I felt like I should say something, do something, but I didn't know what. It was a simple exchange, but it felt like everything was hanging in the balance. Suddenly, she reached up to adjust her hair, pulling it back into a loose ponytail. Her fingers brushed the nape of her neck, and I felt a wave of warmth rush through me at the motion. I could almost feel the weight of her touch, even though it wasn't directed at me. My heartbeat picked up, and I forced myself to look away, not knowing what to say or how to act. Emily caught the brief flicker of my gaze and smiled softly, almost knowingly. "You all right?" she asked, her tone a little lighter now, but the underlying tension still lingered. Yeah, just tired," I replied, trying to keep it casual, but failing to mask the heat rising in my cheeks. "Good," she said with a soft chuckle, her smile lingering. "You should get some rest, then." I nodded, muttering something about heading inside. As I turned to go into my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. The tension in the air wasn't something I had imagined. It was real. But neither of us was ready to address it directly yet. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment, trying to collect my thoughts. Her presence, the way she had leaned in slightly, her effortless beauty, it was all still swirling around in my mind. I couldn't get her out of my head, and I realized, maybe I didn't want to. It had been a week since that awkward encounter, and the strange, unspoken connection between Emily and me had only grown stronger. Every time I saw her, my heart raced, and the usual small talk we shared felt loaded with a quiet energy. But neither of us had acknowledged it. I wasn't sure if she felt the same pull I did, but there was a growing sense that something was happening between us, something that neither of us was willing to label just yet. One evening, as I was getting off work, I saw her standing in the hallway, arms full of groceries. She was smiling as she fumbled with her keys, trying to unlock her door. I hadn't planned to stop, but something about the moment felt different. The usual friendly wave didn't feel enough, there was an urge to connect with her beyond the surface. "Hey, need a hand?" I asked before I even had time to second-guess myself. She turned to me, a slight surprise in her expression before it softened into that warm smile I'd come to recognize. "Oh, that would be great, actually. Thanks." She stepped aside, giving me space to help. Her voice was as warm and welcoming as ever, but today, there was a little more in it, a little more openness. I took the bags from her, noticing the way her fingers brushed against mine as she handed them over. A simple touch, but it lingered, like a silent exchange of something unspoken. The warmth of her hand stayed with me long after she had let go, as if the contact had left a trace I couldn't quite erase. As we stepped inside her apartment, I noticed how comfortable I felt there. The space was simple but cozy, filled with soft lighting and the calming scent of lavender. There was a sense of peace in the air, a stillness that seemed to draw me in. She moved around, putting things away, humming softly to herself as I stood near the kitchen island, unsure of what to do with myself. "So, how's everything?" she asked, breaking the silence. There was a soft familiarity in her voice, like she was trying to make me feel at home, though the situation felt new and unfamiliar to me. "It's good," I said, but the words felt too casual for the way my heart was beating. "Busy, but good." I was actually thinking, "You always seem so calm and put together. How do you do it?" She laughed lightly, her eyes meeting mine with that same warmth. "It's not always as easy as it looks," she said, her tone dropping a little, as if she was letting me into something personal. "Sometimes, I just need a moment to breathe." The way she said it, quiet and honest, made me want to know more. There was a rawness in her that I hadn't seen before, and it made her seem even more beautiful, more real. I felt an urge to bridge the space between us, to tell her that I understood that feeling, that need for quiet moments to recharge. But before I could speak, she broke the silence with a soft invitation, "Would you like some tea? I just made a fresh pot." Her offer wasn't just polite, it was an invitation into her world. It was more intimate than I realized, and I found myself nodding before I could stop myself. Yeah, I'd love that, I said, my voice betraying the excitement that was creeping into my chest. As I sat down at the kitchen table, waiting for her to pour the tea, I couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this quiet invitation, was the beginning of something. Something deeper. Something neither of us had fully acknowledged, but both could sense. The days that followed felt heavier, charged with an unspoken awareness between Emily and me. What had begun as innocent, friendly exchanges now felt different. The weight of our conversations lingered longer, and the moments we shared seemed to stretch into something deeper, more intimate. There were still no overt signs, no grand gestures, just subtle shifts in how we were around each other. And though neither of us said it, we both knew something had changed. It was a rainy afternoon when the turning point came. I had just returned home, damp from the downpour, and as I fumbled with my keys, I heard a familiar voice from behind me. "Hey, you're drenched," Emily said, standing in the doorway of her apartment, holding an umbrella. Her expression was soft, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. "Yeah, didn't expect this rain," I replied with a sheepish smile, trying to shake off the water. She stepped outside, holding the umbrella out to shield me. "Come inside, you'll catch a cold," she insisted, her voice a little firmer than usual, though still warm. I hesitated for a moment, but there was something in her eyes that made it impossible to refuse. As I followed her into the apartment, she moved quickly, taking my wet jacket and hanging it on the coat rack. The air inside was warm and smelled faintly of fresh-baked bread. She hadn't even asked me to come in, it was simply an invitation in the way she took charge, in the way she quietly insisted on helping without hesitation. I stood by the door, unsure of what to do with myself. I was standing in her space, in her home, and it felt different now, like something was waiting to be acknowledged, yet we were both pretending it wasn't. Emily's presence was more overwhelming than usual. It wasn't just her beauty, but the warmth, the kindness in her every movement, the way she made everything feel safe. It made my heart race, and I found myself standing there, unsure of where to go from here. She returned to the kitchen, setting out a fresh cup of tea for me. "You really should stop working so late," she said as she handed me the cup, her fingers brushing against mine. The touch was brief, but it lingered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in her eyes, something that made my chest tighten. A quiet invitation. A question. The air between us grew thick with unspoken words. There was no more denying the pull that had been building for weeks. It wasn't just her kindness or her presence anymore, it was the way she looked at me, the way she spoke, the way every small touch now felt loaded with meaning. I wanted to say something, to ask her if she felt it too, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I sat down, the warmth of the tea in my hands grounding me as we shared the quiet, comfortable silence of two people who knew there was more to their connection, but weren't quite ready to voice it yet. The tension simmered beneath the surface, building in a way that neither of us was prepared to confront, but we both felt it. Her eyes met mine over the rim of her cup, and I saw it then, the same hesitation, the same longing that mirrored my own. The next few days felt like a storm waiting to break. Emily and I had reached a point where the emotional undercurrent between us was undeniable. Each glance, every touch, seemed to carry more weight, more meaning than it had before. I found myself thinking about her constantly, wondering if she felt the same pull that I did. But at the same time, there was a constant internal conflict within me, a hesitation I couldn't shake. I knew she was older, wiser, and had a life that was more established than mine. What would she want with someone like me? Someone still figuring out where he belonged in the world. Every time I caught myself looking at her, I questioned whether I was reading too much into our interactions, whether I was just another young man caught up in a harmless fantasy. She had always been a friend, a neighbor. Was I turning that into something it wasn't? I tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept resurfacing. I couldn't deny the way my heart quickened when she was near. I couldn't ignore the way her presence made everything feel brighter, more alive. But I also couldn't shake the nagging fear that I might be stepping into something I wasn't prepared for, something that could ruin the connection we had. It was another rainy evening when the emotional tension reached its peak. I had run into Emily while I was getting groceries. We stood in the lobby of our building, making small talk, and it felt like any other exchange. But the weight of everything unsaid was pressing on me, suffocating me. I found myself standing closer to her than usual, the space between us narrowing, and my thoughts were spinning in a million directions. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice quiet but concerned, the look in her eyes searching mine for some kind of answer. I couldn't lie. I'd never been able to lie to her, not really. But the truth was more complicated than I could put into words. I wanted to tell her how I felt, to let her know that every moment we spent together felt like a promise of something more. But there was fear of rejection, of stepping out of the safety of our comfortable friendship, of risking everything for something that might never come to fruition. "I don't know," I said softly, my voice betraying the uncertainty I felt. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." She looked at me for a long moment, as though weighing something in her mind. Then, without saying a word, she stepped closer. Her hand brushed against mine as she adjusted her bag, and for a fleeting moment, I felt the heat of her skin against mine. It was a small touch, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Take your time," she said gently, her voice steady but warm. "You don't have to have all the answers right now." Her words should have brought relief, but they didn't. They only deepened the conflict in my chest. I knew she was offering me space, giving me room to figure out what I wanted, but that only made the situation more complicated. What if I waited too long? What if I never found the courage to cross that line? The quiet between us stretched on, thick with tension, as the rain continued to pour outside. We both knew that something had shifted, but neither of us was ready to acknowledge it fully. The emotional conflict was now a constant companion, one I couldn't escape. The fear of what might happen if I allowed myself to fall deeper into this unspoken connection was almost as strong as the desire to give into it. It was late one evening when the silence between Emily and I became too much to bear. After weeks of stolen glances, lingering touches, and emotional turmoil, I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was normal. The weight of the unspoken had grown unbearable. My heart was heavy with all the words I had kept inside, all the emotions I had been too afraid to express. I needed to tell her, even if it meant risking everything. It had been a quiet evening, the kind where the world outside seemed to slow down, and the only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional drip of water from the leaky faucet in the bathroom. I had come over to return something she had lent me, a book I had been meaning to read. It was a casual excuse, but as I stood in her doorway, I knew this moment was far from casual. "Hey," I said, my voice a little more uncertain than I intended. "I wanted to drop this off. Hope I didn't catch you at a bad time." Emily looked up from where she was sorting through her mail on the kitchen table. Her eyes softened when she saw me, and she immediately stood up. "Not at all," she replied, her tone light but inviting. "Come in." I stepped inside, and as I did, I felt the familiar rush of warmth, the way her presence seemed to fill the room. The usual comfort of her space felt different now, almost too intimate, like the walls were closing in around us. I could feel the tension in the air, and I knew it wasn't just me. She could sense it too. "I've been meaning to tell you something," I said, my voice thick with hesitation. I felt my palms start to sweat as I held the book out to her. She took it from me, but instead of letting go immediately, she held it for a moment longer, her fingers brushing against mine once again. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like it carried the weight of everything we hadn't said. Emily gave me a soft, encouraging smile, but there was something more in her expression now, something like understanding. She stepped closer to me, and that was all it took. I couldn't hold back anymore. "I don't know what this is between us," I said, my words tumbling out, "but I can't stop thinking about you. Every time we're together, I feel like there's something more. Something that's been building, something that neither of us has said out loud, but I feel it. And it's driving me crazy." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. The vulnerability in her gaze matched mine. She had known, all along, that something was happening between us. She had been waiting for me to say it, to admit it. "I've been feeling it too," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I didn't want to rush things. I didn't want to make it something complicated." The weight of her words settled around us, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a wave of relief. She wasn't rejecting me. She was acknowledging what I had been feeling. We stood there, close enough now that I could feel the heat radiating from her. Her gaze didn't waver, and as I looked at her, I realized something. We had crossed a threshold, and there was no going back. The tension between us had finally been named. What came next was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure: we were no longer pretending. The truth was out in the open, and for better or worse, everything had changed. The confession had hung in the air between us like a delicate thread, fragile yet undeniable. Emily's soft words, her acknowledgement of the same feelings I had kept hidden, settled into my chest like a quiet weight. I had expected some sort of relief, but instead, there was something more, a sense of stillness, as though the floodgate had opened and everything was now laid bare. But the question remained: what would we do now? Neither of us was rushing to make decisions, but the energy between us had shifted. We no longer felt like two people walking around the edges of a conversation we weren't willing to have. We had finally stepped into the space we had both been circling for weeks, maybe even months. But now, standing there in the dim light of her kitchen, there was no urgency, no frantic need to put a label on what had changed. There was just a quiet understanding that, whatever this was, it would unfold in its own time. Emily smiled gently, her eyes meeting mine with a depth that spoke volumes. "I'm not in a rush either," she said, her voice steady and warm. "I've been where you are before, not knowing what I'm doing or where I'm going. But I think that's okay. We don't have to figure everything out right now. We have time." Those words, "we have time," wrapped around me like a gentle reassurance, a promise that things didn't need to be rushed, that there was no pressure to define everything in that moment. And in that quiet moment of understanding, I realized she wasn't just offering me time to figure things out, she was offering me space to grow, to take things at the pace I was comfortable with. And that comfort, that safety, was more than I had expected from this encounter. It was exactly what I needed. I took a deep breath, the tension in my body slowly easing. The weight of the uncertainty I'd been carrying around for weeks began to lift, replaced by a newfound peace. "Thank you," I said, my voice quieter than I had expected, but full of sincerity. I think I've been scared, but this feels right." She reached out then, her hand brushing against mine in a touch that was both comforting and intimate. It was soft, not rushed, a connection that spoke of patience, of a bond that didn't need to be defined by any immediate expectation. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid of the uncertainty. The silence between us was no longer awkward, it was a silence filled with promise, a promise of a slow, steady connection that would build in its own time. We didn't need answers right away. We had each other's presence, and that was enough for now. Emily's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, her hand gently resting on my shoulder. "Let's just see where it goes," she said softly, a simple yet profound suggestion. And in that moment, as I stood there with her, I realized that sometimes, the most beautiful connections aren't the ones that are rushed or forced. They're the ones that unfold gradually, at their own pace, like a story being written one page at a time. As the evening continued, the rain outside continued its soft rhythm, a gentle reminder that good things take time, and perhaps, this was only the beginning of something beautiful.